Go back in your notes to Jacob, and the very last thing I want to say about Abraham, before we get to Jacob, is where he ended up in Genesis 22. This, of course, is the story of the sacrifice of Isaac, right? So what was Abraham in Genesis 22? And James says this. In the New Testament, Jesus' little half-brother says, "Was not our ancestor Abraham considered righteous for what he did when he offered his son on the altar? And the scripture was fulfilled that says, Abraham believed God and it was credited to him as righteousness." Now, I don't know if I emphasize this enough for you, but let me emphasize it right now, okay? That statement in the middle right here, Abraham believed God, that's from Genesis 15:6. I don't think I'm going to ask you that on a test, but you just need to know that. That's such an important foundational verse in even the New Testament, right, for salvation by faith and all that sort of thing. You just need to memorize it. It's a classic one. Abraham believed God and it was credited him for righteousness. So what I want you to be able to do is when you read something like James here, I want you to be able to put these things together and remember how the story of Abraham went. He was credited righteousness. He believed in chapter 15. But this was from Genesis 22, right? So when it says, and the scripture was fulfilled that says, what he's saying is, and what we know to be true, Abraham failed in chapter 15. He failed in chapter 16 with Hagar. He failed in chapter 17 by laughing. She failed in 18 by laughing. He failed in 20 again with Abimelech. But what James is doing here is very insightfully looking at the story of Abraham and saying, okay, he believed, but did he really believe? Well, it came to fulfillment by the time we get to Genesis 22. And he's really, really hitting it out of the park finally in Genesis 22, right, from where he started. And then he finishes with this. And it might seem like this silly, emotional, sappy, insignificant thing. He says, and he was called God's friend. Now, you might look at that and think, oh, isn't that sweet? Big deal. Is that really good? And let me just say this, that this is the ultimate goal, right? I don't know what you want on your tombstone. I don't know what you want to be remembered for. Maybe you think about all sorts of stuff you want to do. But let's recalibrate our sense of what success is, right? The ultimate goal of success is to actually be so close with God, to be so tight with God that God can say, it's a friend of mine. And this is the powerful conclusion. And it also relates to that idea of theological. What is the purpose of Scriptures? To reveal God to us in order to draw us into a relationship with Him so that God can look down and you can say, yeah, He's my friend. I trust Him so much. Right? So there is the kind of the last thing I want to say about Abraham. And part of the reason I do that is because I want to contrast him with Jacob. So let's take a look at where we're going with Jacob. First day, second day, third day, and now today, we're going to talk about Jacob, who is the un-Abraham. If there's anybody who is not like Abraham, it's Jacob. This is a fascinating story and just ends up giving us a whole lot more insight into who God is. Why was he call himself the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob? Well, we're going to find out, right? So let's do it really quickly here and get right after it in chapter 25. And as soon as he is born, we find out about his name. Let me put the text up here in front of us and get it going, hopefully. Yeah, first thing to notice here is this. His brother is the first one to come out, first one to be born. And his whole body was like a hairy garment, so they named him Esau, right, which means hairy. So he's a fuzzy little guy from the very beginning. And then, after this, his brother came out, Jacob, grasping Esau's heel. So he was named Jacob, which means literally heel grabber, right? How many Jacobs in here? No Jacobs? None? Wow, that's unusual. It's what?
I feel like there's so many Jacobs on this team.
I know. Like every other guy, you just say Jacob, and you're probably right. You know? So Anyway, Jacob, it means heel grabber or deceiver, actually, because when you are walking behind someone, if you grab their heel, you can easily trip them up and make them fall down, right? And so what this comes to mean is someone who kind of sneaks up on you, takes advantage of you, and trips you up. Now, one of the bad ideas when you're doing Bible study is to seize upon a name as though there's some sort of hidden nuggets of truth in there, because there is about 1% of the time, right? And 99% of the time it doesn't make much difference at all what the name actually means. But this one it does, and you know it does because the text, the Bible makes so much of it. It keeps talking about this all the time, right? Jacob is, in fact, a deceiver. And notice that the way that the text skips over their boyhood, right? They're born, and then it says the boys grew up. Why? Because it's not a historical record. It doesn't matter. What matters is what happens next. And what you see here is this little story of Jacob deceiving his brother out of the birthright. He proves who he is. Now, let me show you what I'm talking about. He's gonna deceive a lot. And the first thing he deceives about is this birthright, which is a double portion of the inheritance. This is the way the thing worked. In the Middle East, however many boys you had, you took that number and added 1 to it, divided up the inheritance, and the oldest guy got 2 of those pieces. So if we have 2 sons, you divide up into 3 pieces, and son number 1 gets 2/3, right? If you have 12, then you divide up into 13, and the oldest one gets 2/13, something like that. So what's happening here is Isaac's getting old. He's not getting too old yet, but Jacob is saying to himself, look, my brother is how many minutes older than I am? How much older? Well, minutes anyway, right? 4 minutes. My brother's a stinking 4 minutes older than I am, and he's going to get double what I get. That's not fair. So he doesn't actually deceive him, but he takes advantage of him in a weak moment. It still fits the pattern and says, if you want this soup, then give me your birthright, and he gets it, okay? Esau is dumb. That's another story. But you see the character of Jacob here, right? Now, does it get any worse? And the answer is, oh man, just hold on, right? Chapter 26, the real goal comes into view. Isaac gets the promises. And as you take a look at these verses, you just see them right there, right? I mean, God says to Isaac, I will be with you and bless you. To you and your descendants, I will give all these lands, will confirm the oath I swore to your father Abraham. I'll make your descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky, and through your offspring, all nations on earth will be blessed. Boom, there's Genesis 12, 1, 2, and 3. God is giving those promises to Isaac. He's the one who's now holding on to them, right? Now, you guys are going to really make my day if you can answer this question correctly. Can you tell me in Genesis 12 what was the first thing which God did to make us think, wow, he's really serious about keeping those promises in an unconditional way? What was the very first object lesson, first story that proved that God was totally committed to doing those things, to keeping those promises? Saving Sarah, exactly right, right? Is Genesis 12, 1 to 10, or 12, 10 to 20, he saved Sarah, and we looked up and thought, oh, wow, look, God's serious about this. He'll intervene and do that. If God wanted to demonstrate that the promises are with Isaac, what would be a really cool way to do that? Oh man, not the she's my sister routine again. And the answer is yes, that is true. We look at that and think, oh gosh, surely the PowerPoint's wrong here, right? We've seen way too much of this. The answer is no, you got to see one more. Now we're going to change the names a little bit, and sure enough, Rebecca goes down here to Abimelech, right? And the promises fade away, and God supernaturally intervenes and says, Abimelech, you're a dead man, give her back. And Rebecca goes back. Why? Because God spoke the promises. They are unconditional for Isaac too, right? So just in case you wondered if that's really true, look what happens. After that story is over, it says this in verse 12. Isaac planted crops in the land that same year and reaped 100-fold because the Lord had blessed him. So when I say what kind of increase is this, I'm talking about, okay, look what happens in the guy's life. And he goes out and puts a seed in the ground and, 100-fold comes out. Like that's just mega richness. And everybody sees that. The Philistines see that. But there's somebody else who sees it. Guess who it is? Right? Jacob looks at that and says, wow, this birthright is just a a fixed amount of, camels or assets or whatever, right? But what I'd really like is that birthright, and that birthright is going to my brother, right? So I say the real goal is not just the birthright, the real goal is actually the blessing. So chapter 27, this famous story that we know about, is all about Jacob actually getting the blessing. Now, as we go through this whole thing, it's the same similar with the birthright, like, hey, my brother is 4 minutes older, but he's going to get this. And so how am I going to get it? Well, the time comes for Isaac to die. He knows he's about ready to die. And he wants to pass the blessing to his son, Esau. So don't ask me why it works this way. I can't tell you why. I can just tell you how it works. And the how of the blessing being passed on is this. The father, the patriarch, has the son in front of him, and he actually speaks the blessing onto him. And it's there. Right? Don't ask me why, but that's the way it works. So Isaac says to Esau, hey, you go out and get some game. We'll make a little party out of this, and I'll, give you the blessing and pass them on to you. Well, of course, Jacob and Rebekah are thinking, hey, wait, there's got to be a way for you to, sneak in here, to Jacob in here. And so Jacob says, well, Mom, that'd be really cool, but if he touches me, even though he's blind, he'll know I'm not hairy like my brother Harry, right? And his mom says to him, that's okay, we'll put goat skins on you and he'll never know the difference. I mean, what does that tell you about Esau? I mean, Isaac is right there in the tent. He's half blind. He can't see when the kids are little. What's that moving in? Is that a goat? No, that's Esau. No, it's a goat. I can't tell, right? I mean, yeah, I tell you, he's a fuzzy little guy, right? So anyway, they cook this scheme up, literally. And what I want you to do, as I'm just going to read the story over here quickly, I want you to ask yourself, how many times does he Jacob Isaac? Right? So I want you to keep track on your fingers. Okay, I'm going to read it over. You put a finger up every time he does some Jacobing. All right? So they actually covered the part of his neck with goat skins. That's actually number 1, right? He went to his father and said, my father. Yes, my son, he answered. Who is it? Jacob said to his father, I am Esau. Come on, fingers up in the air. That's 2, right? I'm Esau, your firstborn. There's 3. I have done as you told me. There's 4, right? He didn't go out and get game. He went out in the backyard and killed a domestic goat and pulled it in. I've done as you told me. Please sit up and eat some of my game. That's actually fine because this is not game, right? This is an animal. So you may give me your blessing. Isaac asked his son, how did you find it so quickly, my son? Oh, the Lord your God gave me success. There's 6, right? If you're ever going to lie, bring God into it. Makes it seem really more spiritual, right? God did this, yeah, right? I mean, and as you move down through here, it keeps doing it and doing it and doing it. Come near so I can touch you, right? So Jacob went close to his father, Isaac, and he touched him and said, the voice is the voice of Jacob, but the hands are the hands of a goat, or of Esau. So they were hairy like his brother Esau. Are you really Esau? I am. Sorry. So all the way through here, he's just Jacobing. And his father says, I don't know about this, but, maybe my sniffer is off today, so he gives him a blessing, right? So he does, and he gets it. So then Esau comes in, of course, and when he shouts to his father, hey, I'm home, his father says, oh, my goodness, that's the voice I was listening for and didn't hear. And notice what the text says here. Isaac trembled violently, right? Why does he tremble violently? Because he knows you can't take this back. And he doesn't know who he gave it to. He's just thinking, oh my gosh, I gave it to the wrong guy. And I don't know who's got it, but I really messed up big time here. And so Esau says, no, give me the blessing. He says, nope, can't, it's gone, right? And so they can't, they don't know who it is, and they start to think it through, and they realize, no, wait a minute. Who's been in the habit of Jacobing people around here? Let's see, right? And you have to do that because you got to read the text like this. So he says to him, your brother came, how? How did he come? Your brother came, he came Jacobly, and he took your blessing, right? Esau said, you can read this either one of 2 ways. He said, isn't he rightly named Jacob because he Jacob me these 2 times? Or isn't he rightly named deceiver because he's deceived me these 2 times? He took my birthright and now the blessing. Right? So when he does this, is there any remorse? Do you think he's sorry for his behavior? And you might not be able to know yet, but as you read the whole story over, I'm just going to suggest, I don't think he's sorry at all. I don't think he ever has a moment where he says, oh man, I shouldn't have done that. I think he's saying, got that birthright, got that blessing, on my way, right? And I think that's how he's feeling. So where we go from here is this. He figures, my brother's going to kill me if I don't get out of town, so I'm leaving right now. And he gets out of town, and he has this dream. And you've probably heard the story in Sunday school where there's this stairway reaching heaven, and angels are going up and down. And you think, well, what's a weird dream? What is that all about? Well, what I think it's about is this. And I know this because this is how Jesus uses this whole story. And I think what's happening is that God is in heaven, Jacob's on the earth, and these angels are going up and down as a demonstration that you can actually meet God and know Him. And I think what God is doing is inviting Jacob into a relationship with Him. Now, that might not have occurred to you because you might have believed all the flannel graph stories and assumed Jacob is one of God's children. You probably should not make that assumption at this point. And here's why I say this. Because in the New Testament, Jesus is speaking to a guy named Nathanael. Nathanael comes up to him in John chapter 1, and Jesus says, Nathanael, an Israelite in whom there is no Jacob. Right? You might think of it as an Israelite in whom there is no guile, an Israelite in whom there is no deception. So immediately our minds kind of think back, right, to this story. And Nathanael says, wow, how did you know that? Jesus says, I saw you while you were under the tree, some supernatural knowledge. And that's enough for Nathanael. Nathanael says, wow, you are the Master, you're the Messiah, you're the Son of God. And Jesus says, oh, that's nothing. If you stick around with me, you'll see something better than that. And what you're going to see is this. And then he quotes it, and he says, I tell you the truth, you shall see heaven open and the angels of God ascending and descending on the Son of Man. So what's he doing? Well, he's saying, okay, let me take that story back there, which you know, and let you realize that I'm actually the way, the truth, and life, right? I am that stairway. I am the means by which people have a relationship with God. Right? Now, I take that all back here, and I think that what God is doing to Jacob here is saying, look, I'd kind of like to be your God, right? I want to be everything to you. And he makes these offers to him. And Jacob looks at him, and he says this. He says, right here, Jacob made a vow saying, if God will be with me and will watch over me on this journey I'm taking and will give me food to eat my clothes so I may safely return to my father's house, then the Lord will be my God. Now, stop right there for a second, okay? That might seem like a really spiritual thing to you. And you might say, wow, what a man of God, what a great vow. Is it really? Is it really? If you do good stuff for me over the next few years, then we'll talk about you being my God. I want to say to you, this is not a right way to respond to God. In fact, I'm being a little bit sarcastic here. I hope you catch my point. Jacob believed God and it was credited to him for righteousness, right? I mean, you know, that's the statement we've already talked about, Genesis 15:6, where Abraham did that. Does Jacob do what Abraham did? And the answer is no. Frankly, I think what he's doing is saying, look, I'm getting by just fine because I have this little trick. I'm pretty good at it. I deceive people. I get by. I'm good. I'm fine. You know, if you do this and this and this, we'll talk about you being my God. So I would argue that Jacob basically refuses God's offer of a relationship with him. And this is why the story turns the way it does. Because the story now becomes this. What will God have to do for Jacob to see how much he needs God? And God's going to have to slowly grind him down till he finally says, wow, I can't control everything. I do need you. So let's take a look at the first story. God's discipline for Jacob in chapter 29. This guy goes and he meets Rachel. And this is one lovesick puppy. I just want to tell you. When he sees Rachel, Laban says, hey, if you really want her, just work for 7 years. And he says, no problem, I'll do it. And it's just so funny the way it says at verse 20. So Jacob served 7 years for Rachel, but they seem like only a few days to him because of his love for her. Aww, so sweet, right? 7 years are up, and he says, okay, Laban, I want my wife, right? So Laban gives her to him, and there are a lot of things I don't understand in the Bible, and this is right near the top. Right? What happens, of course, is that Laban brings Leah to him, gave her to Jacob, and Jacob lay with her, and Laban, the servant girl, Zilpah to his daughter, and he's there in the tent all night, and it says, when morning came, there was Leah! Exclamation point. Oh no! Right? He wakes up. I don't understand. Maybe the tents are like really dark. I don't know. Maybe he was half drunk. But in the morning, I just would love to see the look on his face, right? And then it gets even better because he goes to Laban and he starts to sputter. And this is just so ironic. So Jacob said to Laban, what is this you've done to me? I served you for Rachel, didn't I? Why have you Jacobed me, right? And I just imagine Laban like this, southern sheriff with his pot belly and his thumbs in his belt and says, yeah, I did. Right? I got you good, boy. Because God is bringing into Jacob's life this guy who can do to him what he's been doing to everybody else and saying, how does it feel now, bud? Right? You think you're so hot? I can out-Jacob you. And that's part of what God is using Laban to do here. So he's like, 7 years of work down the drain here. Marry the wrong one. What am I going to do? And Laban at least has some compassion. He says, okay, that was probably a dirty trick, but at least I got rid of Leah. So, that's what Laban's thinking. And Laban says, okay, I tell you what, I should have done it to you, but I'll make another deal. I'll give you Rachel if you work another 7 years, right? So he's saying, hey, I'm in this far. I'm not going to stop now. So he starts over here, year 0, works for 7 years as a bachelor, marries Leah, is married to her for 1 week, and then marries Rachel, and then works another 7 years to pay her off, as it were. So within the space of a week, he marries sisters, which is probably not a real smart marital idea, but that's the way it works, right? So God's starting to grind him down. But it also happens here. God's blessing of Jacob in spite of himself. Now this is the part that makes the story complex, but this is where you have to be an adult interpreter. And what I mean is a critical thinking interpreter. God is going to do good things to him. He is not going to deserve them. But in our simplistic little minds, we think, well, if God is blessing him, he must be one of his children. He must be pleasing God. Answer, no. God sends rain on the just and on the unjust. It is the kindness of God that often leads us to repentance. And so what you have to understand is that God is going to bless Jacob, not because he's good, but in spite of the fact that he is bad, because this is what grace is, because God is drawing him into relationship with himself, right? So watch this and don't think that just because Jacob does something, it's a good thing. Jacob's going to do a lot of really stupid things. Yeah. Oh, you know what? Let's just put it this way. I think God's ideal for him probably would have been, if you want to take the whole thing all the way back, probably Esau should have married Leah and he should have married Rachel. But sin gets things twisted and messy, and sometimes there's no real good option. But God uses it. Is that what you're asking? Oh, well, I mean, when you start asking about the goodness of what's going on here, we are down in this morass of sin, and sometimes you get yourself into such bad situations that there is no good answer to it, right? So, yeah, so there's all sorts of things going wrong in this story. Yeah. So, the way it first shows up is this. God is blessing Jacob in spite of himself, and you see this in the story of the kids. Two kinds of kids. First of all, human kids. So Leah and Rachel get into this fertility contest, for lack of a better word, and the score is 4-0 before Rachel ever makes a touchdown. So the way this whole thing works, let me just break into the story in the middle. During wheat harvest, Reuben, one of Leah's sons, brings her some mandrake plants, which he brought to his mother Leah. Rachel said to Leah, please give me some of your son's mandrakes. But she said to her, was it enough that you took away my husband? Will you take my son's mandrakes too? Very well, Rachel said. He can sleep with you tonight in return for your son's mandrakes. Now, the text doesn't make it explicit here, but I think you can figure out what's going on in their head, right? Rachel really wants these mandrakes because she thinks mandrakes do what? She thinks that mandrakes cause you to conceive, right? And so she wants to put the mandrakes by the bed and hopes that the next morning she'll conceive. Now, if you haven't had biology, this can be a hard question. But do mandrakes cause one to conceive? You're worrying me here. No, right? No, they don't. But the bigger question, the better question is, do they think so? And the answer is yes, right? So as this complex story goes, God does give her children because he is good. But she thinks it's because I got those mandrakes and I'm so clever, right? And so she does that with the kids. But the same thing happens on Jacob's part with the other kids, with these kids. Laban and Jacob's flocks get intermixed. You can't keep them separate. So Jacob says, hey, you keep the solid color ones, I'll keep the striped ones and the spotted ones. And so he makes striped objects in front of the feeding trough so that when the animals come and mate in front of the striped objects, they will cleverly have striped offspring. Right? Does this work? No. Does Jacob think it works? Yes. Right? And yet God is the one who's giving him the striped offspring, not because he is doing these stupid tricks, but in spite of that, right? So God is still being good to him, but he's thinking, yeah, I'm so clever here, I'm doing really, really well. Well, that's what makes this story complex. So let's go on to the conclusion of it here. God protects Jacob as he returns. Now, the first thing which he does is he decides to leave Laban for obvious reasons. God does tell him to go, but I think he goes just because he wants to get out from underneath Laban. So in the text here in chapter 31, when Laban had gone to shear his sheep, Rachel stole her father's household gods. Moreover, Jacob Laban the Aramean by not telling him he was running away, so he fled. This is typical stuff, right? And Laban comes after him and says, man, you took my daughters and my grandchildren. What are you doing? And he says, well, you know, my name is Jacob. Right? What do you expect, right? I'm pretty good at this. And Laban says, okay, it's one thing for you to take off, but somebody took my gods. And I hate it when someone takes my gods, you know? So would you at least give me my gods back, right? And Jacob says, well, I'm going to have your gods, right? But you know where they are. They're under Rachel's saddlebags, and so she's sitting on top of them. And when he comes by, she says, oh, don't make me get up, right? Because her excuse is, oh, don't be angry, my Lord. I cannot stand up in your presence. I'm having my period. Oh, right. I mean, even if she was, that's not the real reason. It's because she hidden the gods in the saddlebags, right? So just stop right here and look at the family. And if it wasn't in the Bible, would you think this family that fights over kids and manipulates things and deceives things and trusts in household gods, what would you think their spiritual state was? In Genesis terms, what would you color them? You'd call them pretty blue, wouldn't you? Yeah. So at this point then, this is the really cool climax of the story where we find out what God is ultimately going to do. We're going to meet Esau. And so we get past Laban and we think, oh man, we escaped that. Well, you went from the frying pan right into the fire, right? Because now what he does is he's thinking, okay, I got to get across the river back where I'm from, and I'm going to leave Laban behind, but now I got to deal with Esau. And last time I saw Esau, he was going to kill me. And so what he does in chapter 32 is he sends messengers out ahead of him with all sorts of gifts and things to meet him. And he's trying to feel out what's it going to be like. And the messengers come back, and this is amazing, even the way it's written. He says, did you see my brother? Is he okay? And the messengers return. They said, oh, we went to see your brother, and he's now coming to meet you with 400 men who are with him. Oh, my goodness. Oh, we saw your brother, all right? And he said he can't wait to bring you, and he's bringing a small army, right? Which causes no amount of panic on his part. And we see him do something he's never done before, and that is he starts to pray. Oh, God of my father Abraham, God of my father Isaac, please save me, I pray, from my brother. So what he does is he goes to this river, river right here on the left-hand side. That's actually where it is, the brook Jabbok, right? We know where it is. And he wrestles all night with this man. Now, we know later that the man is actually an angel, and in fact, we know later that the man is actually God, because he names the place Peniel, which means I have wrestled with God. I've seen the face of God, right? So again, we have here actually Jesus, right, who comes to meet him. And as they are wrestling, Jacob says, Jacob doesn't know he's God when he's wrestling him. He just thinks he's a messenger, an angel from God. And he's wrestling, trying to get the blessing, the protection from the man. And they actually are really, literally, physically wrestling back and forth, right? And it says, when the angel saw, or when the man saw, that Jacob was not going to give up, it says he could not overpower him, but obviously he can overpower him because he just touches his hip and it's out of socket and the fight's over. But I think the point is that Jacob was not going to stop fighting, and so the angel finally says, okay, in order to bring this thing to an end, I'm going to have to supernaturally take your hip out of socket so you can't fight anymore. Right? And that's what he does. So he touches the hip, and then he asks him his name. Now, get this story in your head, just like we did, when Adam named his wife Eve. Same thing here. These two are wrestling. I mean, they're really working back and forth, and finally his hip is out of socket. He can't fight anymore, and they're sitting there, and they're sitting on the banks of the river, and they're both breathing really, really hard. And the angel says, well, I'm glad that's over. I don't think we've been properly introduced. What's your name? That's not it at all. What's going on is this. The angel says, look, I know you want the blessing, but you're not going to get it by fighting me for it. If you want the blessing, I'll tell you how you can get it, and here's how. Tell me your name. And you understand why that's such a significant question? What is he saying to him? Your name is not just your name, it's what you are, right? The whole story is emphasized. This is who he is. So God says to him, if you want the blessing, you got to fess up and tell me who you are. So if you give me a little dramatic license, I think it might have gone something like this, right? The angel says, "You tell me who you are, and I'll give you the blessing." And Jacob says this, okay, you want to know who I am? I'll tell you who I am. If you want to know who I am down deep inside, my character is I'm a deceiver. If you want to know, I'm a liar. I'm a manipulator. I cheat people. I'm a cheater. And the angel does not say, oh, I had no idea that's who you are. Right? The angel says, I know exactly who you are, and I just want to see if you could figure it out. And now that you have told me who you are, I will do better than this. I will change your name, and I will give you the blessing. Now, notice what just happens here, right? It says, I'm going to give you the name Israel, which means Jacob has overcome. How does Jacob overcome? You've been fighting with God, with people all your life. How does he overcome? Does he overcome because he keeps fighting? The answer is what? No. He overcomes because he stops fighting, right? He stops fighting, he confesses his character, and he asks for the blessing in faith. Now stop right there and let the entire lesson for the day sink in. What just happened to Jacob? He just got saved, in my opinion. This is the first time he's actually come to the point where he said, I'm not going to depend upon my own cleverness. I'm going to depend upon you. And God says it's about time. And what you find out as we go into chapter 35 is some really sweet stories about stuff that we've never seen before about him. Look at this. Look at this. It's just so amazing. In chapter 35, God said to Jacob, go up to Bethel and settle there and build an altar. So Jacob said to his household and to all who were with him, get rid of the foreign gods you have with you, right? Like Rachel, those foreign gods, we're not trusting in those anymore. And they went up and they built an altar to God, and he prays, and the terror of God fell upon all the people around them. He buried their foreign gods under the oak tree. But what's amazing is if you take a look at all these different scenes in his life, he is blue and blue and blue and blue and blue, and not till the end does he become orange. Now, let me just leave you with one question or one statement. And that is this. Why would God call himself the God of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob? Think about the differences between Abraham and Jacob, and why does God call him the God of both? And by the way, while you're at it, you look at those two guys, Abraham and Jacob, you tell me which one you're most like. Tell me your name. I am so glad he's the God of not just Abraham's, but also Jacob's, aren't you?